Today, we intend to speak to you about the thing called Nibbana or Nibbana. Many of you have probably heard of the word nirvana or nirvana, which is a Sanskrit word. In Buddhism here, we don't use Sanskrit very much. Instead, we use Pali. The word Nibbana means the same thing as the Sanskrit word nirvana. However, this word nirvana is a bit chancy or dangerous because it's very close to the word nivarana, which means the hindrances, which are things that disturb the mind. And so the word Nibbana is safer, it's less often misunderstood. But whether we call it Nibbana or nirvana, we're speaking of essentially the same thing. You've all heard some things about this thing we call Nibbana and have some understanding and interest about it. However, there remain things which you do not understand completely, and so we will be discussing some further things which you ought to be greatly interested in. Nibbana is the highest thing in Buddhism. It's the supreme thing in Buddhism. However, almost all the different sects, creeds, and doctrines that have occurred in India have had some aspect or something they called Nibbana or nirvana. They've all had some kind of nirvana. However, the meaning in each creed or doctrine or school can differ and is often quite different than the meaning we'll be discussing here. Today, we'll be talking especially about Nibbana in Buddhism. Somebody described Nibbana in a way that is both easy to understand and also correct. They said that Nibbana is the summum bonum, the utmost goodness of Buddhism. All genuine religions, all the different sects and creeds and denominations in India and elsewhere have something that is its summum bonum. For example, in Christianity, the summum bonum is to be with God in the kingdom of God. And so Buddhism also has its summum bonum, which is Nibbana. Without Nibbana, Buddhism would not be Buddhism. Or we could say that without Nibbana, Buddhism would have no meaning or value. This is why we study the thing called Nibbana as the essence, or the heart, or the goal of Buddhism. Without this, Buddhism would be meaningless. There's a very important matter which is commonly misunderstood. Many people think that Nibbana means death, that Nibbana is the same thing as death, or that it occurs after death. This is a very grave and serious misunderstanding. If something is truly to be the summum bonum, it must be something that we can get in this very life, right here and now, in this present life. If we must wait for some other life then it can't be the summum bonum. So the summum bonum of Buddhism, Nibbana, has nothing to do with death. But this is a common problem. It occurs even in Christianity. The true kingdom of God is something that we can find in our own hearts here in this life. But there are many people who think that it must come after death. And so they have the same problem as those who believe that Nibbana means death or happens after death. And so there are some who must wait for the kingdom of God or Nibbana until after they die. This understanding is not correct. It's not proper, and it has no benefit for human beings. So whether we call it the kingdom of God or the summum bonum or Nibbana, please understand that it has nothing to do with death. The same problem exists in both religions. There are some Christians that insist that the kingdom of God can only be entered in the afterlife, or whatever they want to call it. They won't admit, they won't accept that we can enter the kingdom of God within our own hearts right here in this life. And the same thing happens in Buddhism. Those who insist that Nibbana comes after death. Let's be very careful on this matter and understand correctly that both Nibbana and the kingdom of God, if they are to have meaning and benefit for human beings, that they must be something that we can have, get, receive, obtain, experience, whatever, right here in this life, this present life, before death. Allow us to tell you in advance a little bit ahead of time, so it'll be easier for you to understand later, that when one enters or penetrates or realizes Nibbana, then one at the same time enters the kingdom of God or is at one with God. When the mind is at one with God or enters the kingdom of God, then it realizes Nibbana. Please understand this now. It will help you as this talk continues. So many Buddhists think that Nibbana occurs after death, that Nibbana is some city or state or place, some wonderful city where we go after death. This understanding is both amusing and laughable, and at the same time very, very sad and pitiful. The same thing happens in Christianity, of course. Those who think that the kingdom of God is some physical city or place or kingdom. When this understanding interferes, then people aren't able to realize that Nibbana and the kingdom of God are to be experienced within each individual's own heart or mind when that individual has correctly practiced Dhamma. This is a point we should all understand. All the various sects and schools that occurred in India in the Buddha's time taught that Nibbana was something experienced within this very life, within the heart and mind in this life. The exact meaning of it may have differed. Some said that the experience of the first level of absorption or deep concentration was Nibbana. Some said the second level of absorption, others the third or the fourth, or the so-called immaterial absorptions, such as consciousness is infinite, or nothingness or is limitless, and various deep levels of concentration were taken to be nirvana or nibbana, but in all of these cases it was understood that nibbana occurred within this life. The misunderstanding that nibbana was some city or place we went to after death arose later. Another misunderstanding, which is equally pitiful, is one that is very common nowadays. There are many that believe that nibbana is something that is out of date or old-fashioned or something just for old people. Some even say that it's foolish or impossible nowadays. So there are many who have no interest in nibbana because they feel it's old-fashioned or beyond what modern, or something that modern man should not be interested in. This understanding is very dangerous. It seems that the same thing happens in Christianity, where there are many people who think that the kingdom of God is old-fashioned, out of date, foolish, even stupid. These misunderstandings ought to be eliminated and gotten rid of so that we can be interested in the true nibbana. And so we're going to pull these back into the present, into our own hearts. We're going to pull nibbana and pull the kingdom of God into our hearts right now, in the present, in order to understand, realize, and have these highest things, nibbana and the kingdom of God. There are many directions from which we can approach this thing, nibbana. First, we'll look at the word in its literal sense. We'll look at the letter of nibbana. When we take nibbana literally, it has the meaning, the quenching of fires, or the quenching of hot things. Anytime something hot is quenched, is cooled, that is the meaning of nibbana. So, in the physical way, if a physical fire is quenched, is cooled, we call that nibbana. Or if the mental fires, the defilements of greed, anger, and delusion are cooled, are quenched, we call that nibbana. But in both sense, whether it's physical or mental, we can use the same word. We prefer this word quench. And so please listen to it carefully. The quenching of heat, of fire, is the literal meaning of the word nibbana. It might surprise you to know that this, in the Pali language, is a very common, ordinary word. It was originally just a word that children and adults and everyone would use. Anytime something hot cooled off or was quenched, that was the word nibbana could be used, whether it was a physical thing or a mental thing. This is the literal sense of nibbana. So a child might yell out from the kitchen that the fire nibbanad, mean the fire cooled down or went out. Or the child might call out that the soup has nibbanad, meaning the soup has cooled down enough that we can eat it. The meaning of the word nibbana has these very common, ordinary, everyday meanings that even a child would know and use. And so we can use it even for material, physical things. So to understand it, we should understand it in this material aspect as well. Or a goldsmith working with gold in his furnace, then when he took the molten gold and poured it out and then cooled it with air or with water, that gold, that hot molten gold, would also nibbana. It would cool down. So we can use the word in this sense as well. or wild animals that have been recently captured from the forest, animals that still are quite fierce and dangerous. When these animals are tamed or are trained until they become tame, when all that fierceness and danger has been cooled down, then we can say that these animals have been made Nibbana. When the fire of wildness and danger has been Nibbanaed. We can use the word in this sense also. So, in the literal sense, these various meanings we've discussed so far all come down to a cooling down, a quenching of fire or of heat. And we've used it so far in a physical, material sense. The meaning, the sense, the deeper sense of the word Nibbana, we can use it about the mind and about life. And so when one's life is cool, when one's family situation is cool, we can also use this word Nibbana. When our life is free of problems and hassles and disturbances and annoyances, then we can say that life is Nibbana. And so, in this deeper sense, the meaning of Nibbana is cool, or coolness. When someone's life, when the mind is cool, as we have just described, this is called Nibbutta, one who is cool, or the cool one. Let us tell you ahead of time also that whenever the mind is free of any conception or emotion of I and mine, of self and of selfishness, then that mind is cool. But whenever there arises in the mind a thought or an emotion or idea or sense of I, of mine, of self, of selfishness, then that mind becomes hot. So when the mind is free of this heat, it is cool. It is Nibbana. Now once again, the limitations of language make difficulties for us. So when we say cool, many people think that this is the opposite of hot. Real Nibbana that we're speaking of is not the opposite, is not the partner or the mate of hotness or heat. The cool of Nibbana that we're talking about has nothing to do with temperature. It isn't the opposite or the complement, the correlate of hotness or heat. And cool also, in this meaning, doesn't have anything to do with cold. If you were cold, really cold, well then you'd catch pneumonia and die. And that's not what we're talking about. The coolness of Nibbana is not the opposite. It's not caught up in any of the meanings of hot and cold in temperature. It's a different kind of cool. A coolness when the mind is void of I and mine and selfishness. So then we come back to the word void. Void that is void of positive and negative, of hot and cold, of all dualisms. Void that is above all of that duality. This is the real meaning of coolness. The real coolness is void. It has nothing to do with hot and cold or with positive and negative. In the Pali texts, it's recorded very clearly that the quenching of the fire of raga, lust, the quenching of the fire of tosa, anger, and the quenching of the fire of moha, delusion. This is Nibbana. So understand coolness in terms of the quenching of those fires of lust, anger, and delusion. Now, let's start over and take a good look at the importance of this thing we're calling coolness or quenching. If we look at our own lives, we'll see that without the quenching and cooling of thirst, of craving, then we would either go crazy or we would die. All the desires and craving and thirst and hunger and fears and worries, all these fires that are coming up all the time each day, if there wasn't any quenching and cooling of these fires, if all these fires were burning in the mind constantly, non-stop, then the mind couldn't take it and we would go crazy, or if we didn't go crazy, we would just plain die. This is pointing to the very basic necessity of Nibbana, of quenching in this meaning, that the calming of all that desire and craving and thirst, that cooling, that quenching, is necessary if we're going to avoid going insane, if we're going to avoid committing suicide. So in just this very fundamental way, can you see the importance right here, today, right now, in your own lives of Nibbana? So even if this quenching is just a little bit here and a little bit there, only very temporary, or little Nibbanas, little temporary quenchings, even so it is still absolutely necessary for the survival of life. So if you can reflect in this way, you'll see that for all of us, the quenching of these fires is absolutely necessary. If, for example, if hunger went on endlessly, continuously, without letting up, without ever stopping, then we would die. If anger was a constant phenomena, continuous in our life, then we would die. Or even if love for our lover, if this love just went on and on and on without ever being quenched, then we would die. For all of us, the continuation, the survival of our life depends on quenching, on Nibbana. If all these fires went on and on and on, we couldn't take it. So it's Nibbana that sustains life. This quenching, this cooling, nourishes, sustains life. Without it, life could not continue. If you can see this, you will see how important Nibbana is, even to those who have no interest in spiritual things. They still need it in order to survive. There are two types of quenching. The first is the quenching that happens by itself, and the second is the quenching that we have arranged, that has occurred through our practice of Dhamma. All the things that happen within our lives will quench eventually by themselves. All the harmful or evil or hot things that occur in the mind, these will naturally quench by themselves. Nothing is permanent. So all these things will eventually come to a quenching, a cooling of their own. But sometimes if that doesn't happen soon enough, or if we have enough wisdom, we can be aware of the possibility to quench these things through our practice of Dhamma. Please note the difference between the two kinds of quenching. We can study the meaning of Nibbana right here, now, today, in our own lives. We can just take the ordinary experiences of our lives and use these as a way to explore what Nibbana is. For example, when a fire goes out, just the very simple experience of seeing a fire, a candle, a match go out, in that we can see the meaning of Nibbana in a very simple way. Or when we take a bath, the water cools down the heat of the body, and this is an experience of quenching. Or when we sweat, when we perspire, the sweat coming out of our pores cools the body, cools that heat down. This is an experience of Nibbana. We can use these very basic human experiences to learn, to get to know the meaning of Nibbana. We can directly experience it in this way for ourselves. There are all kinds of these examples. When it rains, we can experience the cooling that occurs all over from the rain. Or when there is an illness, a pain or fever or something, when this goes away, we can experience that quenching. All kinds of different experiences that will occur in our daily life can help us to discover the meaning of quenching, of Nibbana. But nobody takes the time to look. Nobody is interested in this thing called Nibbana, and so they don't even look for it and are completely unaware of it, although it's happening constantly in our own lives. So take the time to pay attention to these very simple experiences of Nibbana that are occurring in all the things around us and in everything that arises within our minds. We can use all of these in order to discover the meaning of quenching. In brief, we can see Nibbana or quenching in everything. All things that arise, all things that are caused, that occur, all things that are born will eventually quench, will eventually Nibbana. For this reason, we can study this quenching in everything. All the various things that arise eventually will quench. In Pali, the words are Yankinchi Samutaya Tamang Sapantang Nirotha Tamang, which means all the things that arise through causes will quench. And to see this is to see Dhamma. When we start to see this quenching, the cooling of all conditioned things like this and all the things that happen within our lives, when we see this quenching that occurs within all these things, then we begin to see Dhamma. The eye of Dhamma, the spiritual eye, begins to open as we see all this quenching happening everywhere. And when the eye of Dhamma, the spiritual eye, begins to open, then we begin to understand the Dhamma. And so in everything that you could possibly see or know or experience is an opportunity to begin to see this truth of quenching, to see this fact of Nibbana. And if we begin to see this, then the spiritual eye begins to open. And as that understanding of Dhamma grows, it is through this that the spiritual path develops and reaches fruition. Whenever you see the quenching of something, then you ought to see Nibbana in that thing. Whenever you see something quench, you ought to see Nibbana. Whatever it is, no matter where, in anything where you see quenching, you should see Nibbana. If we can study Nibbana in all the things that are happening everywhere, anywhere, all the time, then we will start to understand the true meaning of Nibbana. We can begin with the little things, the little quenchings that really don't have that much meaning or significance. But then we can explore more and more deeply so that the understanding of Nibbana becomes more and more deep, more profound, and gets closer and closer to the true Nibbana that is the most significant thing in human life. So using all the different possibilities, all the different occurrences of quenching within our lives, we can study the meaning, the significance of Nibbana. So take the opportunity of all these little Nibbanas that occur every day. Study them more and more until the understanding and experience deepens, until the point where we have a sincere desire and need for the highest, the most complete, the perfect Nibbana. Please don't be careless about these little quenchings that occur each and every day. Just because they're small doesn't mean they should be overlooked. These are the starting point of our understanding. So we should be very careful to observe these little Nibbanas, the momentary quenchings that are occurring all the time. And then to study these so that our understanding grows and becomes more correct, more profound, until we develop a very earnest and sincere desire for perfect Nibbana. So use these small opportunities that nature is giving you now in order to develop towards the more perfect Nibbana. So if we observe in the way we have been describing and come to see that it's these little Nibbanas, these little quenchings that sustain life, that nourish life, that cool life, that allow us to continue in life. If we start to see this, then we will genuinely appreciate Nibbana, and we will start to actually love Nibbana, this thing that allows us to live. And then our desire, our need, our want for Nibbana will grow and grow until it becomes very sincere and earnest. So use these little opportunities to allow our love and need for Nibbana to grow, and so that we will then apply ourselves fully to the higher methods which will allow the realization of perfect Nibbana. So now we have studied the little Nibbanas sufficiently, understood this basic level of Nibbana well enough that we can begin to develop this understanding, to expand it, to broaden it, in order to come to a realization of the Nibbana which is complete, which is full, which is perfect. So please take this beginning level of study now and expand it towards a deeper realization. Please study this matter very, very carefully. The first thing we need to understand is what we call dukkha or tukka, suffering, mental suffering. If we don't understand this thing called dukkha, then it's hopeless. It's impossible that we would ever understand Nibbana. So let's begin by understanding what is meant by dukkha, suffering, so that we can also understand Nibbana. As we said earlier, Nibbana is the quenching of dukkha. But if we don't know dukkha, then how are we going to know that quenching? Or if we don't know what dukkha is, well then there's no meaning. There isn't any real quenching for us if we don't understand what dukkha is. So then, let's look into the matter of dukkha. Let's examine the dukkha that is occurring, the suffering that's happening in our own lives today and every day. in our normal daily lives in order to understand dukkha sufficiently that we can also understand the quenching, the nibbana of that dukkha. So we can, in every day, there are all kinds of little dukkhas, little experiences of dukkha happening over and over and over again, all the time. These little experiences of dukkha are happening over and over again. And so there are a lot of these little things that are dukkha, that are suffering. And so we can get to know these. In Pali we call these, in Thai, the niwan, in Pali the nivarana, which is that word that tends to get confused with nirvana. Nirvana and nivarana are quite different. The niwan we often translate as the hindrances. You'll start to understand what we mean as we describe them. They're these little things which disturb and annoy the mind, which pester the mind throughout the day. The first of these is the feeling that kind of flows in a sexual way. It's sexual feelings or feelings of sexuality. And these are, if you pay attention to these, you'll see how they excite and disturb and annoy the mind all the time. And when the mind is being pestered by these sexual feelings, how cool is the mind? Can the mind be cool at all? For the mind to be cool, these sexual feelings have to be quenched. And so this is the first example, the first of the nivarana. The second one is dislike, aversion, ill will. It's when we don't like anything. We don't like this, we don't like that, we don't like this person, we don't like that person. This feeling becomes so stupid that we don't like anything. We don't really know what it is we don't like. There's just this feeling of dislike, of aversion. When the mind is being pestered like this, annoyed by this feeling, it's not at all comfortable or peaceful. But when this feeling of dislike is quenched, then the mind is very much at ease. It's cool. This is the second of the nivarana, the feeling of dislike, of aversion. The third of these is when the mind is weak, dull, when the energy level of the mind has dropped, when the mind is very low in energy. It's not very bright, it's kind of dull, dim, weak. When the mind is lacking in energy like this, then it really isn't able to do any work. It's lacking the freshness, the brightness that we need to do anything. And so the mind like this is very lazy, very, very dull. It's very dim. This includes also when the mind is drowsy and sleepy. All these feelings in the mind which are tied in with a weak level of energy. When the mind is lacking in the strength, the brightness, the freshness, the sharpness that it needs to function properly, to do the various duties of life. This all makes up this third nivarana, when the mind is dull, weak, dim, drowsy, and so forth. You need to get to know this thing as it really exists. It's not good enough just to write it down in your notebook or to think about it, but to examine this as it arises in your own mind all the time, even maybe right now. Get to know it as it really exists, and then you will be able to start to see how it quenches as well. The fourth one is the opposite of the third. It's when the energy in the mind is causing the mind to scatter, to disperse, to reek out. It's a bubbling, bouncy, scattered, distracted mind that's bouncing all over the place, running all over the place. When the mind is dispersed and distracted like this, it's unable to think, it's unable to work. It can't do anything properly because its energy is going off in all directions. This is something that, of course, is occurring to all of you constantly. And so it's time you got to know it and really studied what it is like. So the fourth of these is this dispersion, this distracting, this scattering of the mind and its energy. The fifth nivarana, or hindrance, is uncertainty. Uncertainty or doubt or suspicion. It's when we're uncertain about what is happening or what is right, when we're uncertain about whether what we're doing is correct, where we sit there and think, is this right? Am I doing the right thing? Or is my life correct? We have all kinds of doubts like this. Is what I'm doing right? And when we are thinking like this, then we are never contented. There is no contentment. And these doubts and suspicions and uncertainty arises about our life. Is our way of life, is our life really safe? Is it really healthy? Is it really correct? We're being disturbed by these doubts and uncertainties all the time. And so our life is never really at peace. It's happening in your own minds, whether you've taken the time to look or not. It's happening. And so it's much better to observe it in the reality of the thing and not just the sound or the letters of the word. So now let's take a look and see what it would be like if all of these things were quenched. If all five of these hindrances were quenched, what would that be like? If all five were completely quenched, so in one moment there were none of them at all, then Nibbana would appear, would manifest automatically, spontaneously, by itself. When all five of these hindrances are quenched, then there is nothing but Nibbana. The mind is cool, is quenched. Now, if we want, we can just let these things quench by themselves, but that may take a while, and we may not be able to put up with all the hassle and discomfort while we're waiting. It's really not enough to just wait for them to quench by themselves. And so we need to do something about them. We need to quench them through our own practice. There are various methods for doing so. And this is why we practice mental cultivation. This is why we train and develop the mind, or one of the reasons, in order to quench these little fires or hindrances. Through the correct practice of concentration or tranquility meditations, through the correct practice of things like anapanasati, mindfulness of breathing, through using these mental development techniques and methods, it is possible to quench these nivarana, these hindrances. And then when that happens, there is an experience, a little temporary experience or taste of nibbana. These little nibbanas are the result of correctly practicing mental development. And within them is the correct meaning, the real meaning of nibbana, even though it's just little nibbanas, not the perfect and complete nibbana, but still it has the same meaning. An interesting thing about these nivarana is that they can arise without any external concern encouraging them or stirring them up. It's not necessary for there to be some external object of these hindrances. You can observe this easily sometimes when you're in bed about to fall asleep, where these nivarana will just come up from inside us without any real objects being there to stimulate them. They can just come up from inside because their causes are internal. This is a very interesting thing about them. Exactly How that happens we'll discuss at another time. But you can see how these nivaranas, these hindrances, can happen without any external object. And when you understand this, you'll see how easy it is for them to occur and how that they're happening so often. These nivaranas are just little things, little disturbances and annoyances of the mind which bring about little bits of dukkha. It's dukkha, it's suffering, but on a very low level. It's annoyance and that, because they're coming from within. It's not any big, heavy-duty thing, because they're just arising from within, and there isn't necessarily an external object. So we also need to move on and examine the stronger, the heavier suffering that arises from the defilements. The defilements are much stronger, much more destructive, and bring about much more torment and suffering than the little nivaranas. The nivaranas are like half grown or half complete, but the kilesas, the defilements, are full blown. They're very powerful. So we need to study these as well, because they bring about much suffering in our lives. We've already talked about them before, so you should understand them already. We'll go into them just a little bit. The first is raga or lopa. It's wanting, desiring to get into, hold and clutch and hug and all that. That's the first kind, wanting to pull in, grasp, to bring in. That's the first kind, greed and lust. The second is tosa, hatred, and kota, anger. This is the opposite. It's wanting, it's disliking, wanting to knock away, wanting to get rid of, wanting to destroy. And then the third is moha. It's where we don't know what's going on at all. We're confused, we're deluded, and it's like the mind running around in circles. So there's the pulling, gathering, sweeping in. There's the pushing and knocking away, and then the running around in blind, confused circles. These are the three kinds of kilesa. These are big, heavy things now that are happening. If we're going to understand Nibbana, we need to understand these aspects of dukkha. So take a look at these things as they occur. Get to really know them. If you don't understand these defilements, then you'll never understand Nibbana. So please pay attention to these defilements, and then you'll be able to get an idea, to imagine what Nibbana is. When we say to know and understand these three defilements, we mean to experience, to have a direct, personal, penetrating experience of these things. That means when they happen, really feel it. Not just think about it or remember it a few minutes later, but really experience it. And when you have this direct and penetrating experience of these three defilements, you'll see that they're fires. Experience how hot, how burning these things are. And then when you experience that, then you'll see how when those fires don't exist, when they have been quenched, then you'll see how cool, how peaceful, how right Nibbana is. If you don't understand these fires, these defilements, you'll never have any clue about Nibbana. Nibbana is the quenching of dukkha. So we have to have a very full, a very clear understanding, experience of these defilements. They're happening anyway. So why not just see what they're like and get it over with, so that you can understand what's better, the quenching of these things, the coolness of Nibbana. There's another aspect of dukkha which nobody ever talks about. They don't talk about this thing. It's maybe because it's very profound or very subtle. but we'd like to talk about it now. There's what happens whenever these defilements, whether lust, anger, or delusion occur, whenever they happen, after they have passed, they build up. Each time they contribute to a familiarity with these things, or a tendency for them to happen again. Each time a defilement occurs, it builds up the tendency for that defilement to reoccur. These tendencies pile up, they build up in the depths of the mind, or what we could maybe call the substratum of the mind, the foundation levels of the mind. These tendencies develop, and so it becomes easier and easier for the defilements to occur, because these tendencies become deeper and more set. These patterns solidify. This is a much more subtle thing, and so it's often not talked about, and people don't pay much attention to it. But to understand dukkha, we have to understand how this aspect of defilement works as well. It's more subtle, but you can see how it happens. These tendencies building up within the depths of the mind, we call the anusaya, or in Thai, anutsai, the tendencies. This is something that deserves our very careful attention. We need to, I've been instructed to find a very easy word that's easy for you to understand and remember, that carries the meaning of a familiarity that returns very quickly or very easily. Meaning, once the mind is familiar with a particular defilement, that defilement returns or is recaused very easily, very quickly. These are kind of habits of mind, but I think the word tendency, these tendencies of mind, captures the meaning sufficiently. That once that mind becomes more and more familiar with each defilement, then that defilement occurs more and more easily. It returns more and more easily. This is what we can call the tendencies, the anutsaya. Now, as we build up, as we deposit and pile up these tendencies, they build up a pressure. As all this gunk, this junk is deposited in the mind, it starts to bubble and ferment, and it builds up a pressure. And as this pressure builds, it's very easy for that pressure to escape, to flow out, to shoot out. And so if there's any external concern or object, then it will shoot out in a complete form as lust, anger, or delusion, when there's an external object for it to shoot out at, to flow out at. When there's no external object, it will just kind of ooze out, seep out, or bubble up as the nivarana, which aren't as full or complete as the defilements, but are still suffering nonetheless. This is a very important secret of what's going on in the mind, how these tendencies pile up and bubble away, ferment away, all this gunk and scum festering in the mind. And then it either shoots out at the external objects or kind of bubbles up as the hindrances, the nivarana. Now, when this fermenting in the mind shoots out at a specific object, we call that the asava. The asava is when that pressure shoots out, bursts out. That is that flowing out of that junk, that filth in the mind, is called asava. When it first occurs, if it's primarily stirred up by the object, we call that kilesa, or defilement. But when it's more coming out of this these tendencies within the mind bursting out. We call that asava, or the outflows. So these are aspects of what's going on in the mind. We need to understand all of these aspects, the nivarana, the hindrances, those more subtle, incomplete, more vague feelings. Then the full-blown, the full-form defilements of greed and lust, anger and hatred and delusion. Then the tendencies, the anusaya, that build up in the substratum of the mind, and then that shooting out, that flowing out of the asava. If we understand all four, nivarana, kilesa, anusaya, and asava, then we will completely understand what we mean by fire. This is the aspects of the fire that's burning the mind. These nivarana, the hindrances, although they're small, they're happening all the time. And no matter how small they are, they're still hot, they're still suffering. And then the defilements, they don't happen as much. The nivarana are happening all the time. The kilesa, defilements, aren't happening so often, but when they happen, they're heavy and they're really hot. And then there's those anusaya, where we store up that heat so that it's ready to shoot out, to bubble out, to burst out. And so there's these aspects of all this heat, all this fire. Please understand what these things are. Understand, get to know, really, deeply, completely, perfectly, what nivarana is, what the hindrances are, what kilesa is, what the defilements are, what anusaya is, what the tendencies are, and what asava is, what the outflows or cankers are. Please really get to know these, really clearly, profoundly, and completely, so that you will be able to also understand Nibbana. So we come to dukkha, or tukka. The meaning of dukkha is very broad, but it always comes down to torment. The meaning of dukkha can be summarized as torment, some aspect or another of torment within the mind. This is dukkha. So these hindrances, these nivarana, how do they torment the mind? The kilesa, the defilements of greed, hatred, and delusion, how do these torment the mind? The anusaya, the tendencies, how do they torment the mind? These things that make it so easy for defilement to occur. None of us want to feel greedy. Nobody likes to be angry or stupid, to be afraid, to feel lonely. We don't want to feel like this. We don't like to worry. But because of these tendencies, it's so easy. It's just because we've built up this familiarity, these habits, patterns in the depths of the mind. It's just so easy to get angry, easy to be afraid. It just happens so easily. How does this easiness, this tendency, torment the mind? And then the asava, that flowing outward which becomes defilement again, that flowing out that turns into either anger or greed or fear or worry, whatever. All these things that are tormenting the mind, burning, scorching, singeing the mind. Get to see what this is like, to really understand this dukkha of all these fires burning and scorching, tormenting the mind. All of these are associated and interconnected. So why is it that we can't control ourselves? Why don't we have any self-control, that we don't fall into all these ugly, negative things that nobody likes? It's because they're interconnected, and so we've filled our bags with the anutsaya. Our bags are full of these tendencies, and so we're unable to control ourselves. These things, some people think, just happen, but it's because they're interconnected. So we suffer, we experience dukkha because our bags are too full, are too stuffed with these anutsaya. But there's something we can do about this. Once each defilement has occurred, it burns the mind. But what we can do is, by practicing correct mental development, both of the concentration type, or the concentration aspect, along with the insight aspect that sees into the reality of things, through correct mental cultivation, especially mindfulness of breathing, what we do is we poke a hole, we punch a hole in this bag, and then drain off the tendencies. Instead of building up the tendencies more and more, we siphon them off, we drain them off through this hole that we drill with concentration and insight. And so that bag that is stuffed full, that is overstuffed with anutsaya, with these tendencies, the bag becomes less and less full. And as it empties, there's less and less of these outflows. When we talk about abandoning the defilements, this is what we mean. A defilement that's already occurred, there's not much you can do to abandon it. But we prevent further defilements. This is what we mean by abandoning them. By draining off the tendencies, then this lessens the possibility of further defilements. And as insight deepens, as the understanding of Dhamma deepens, that hole becomes bigger, and the tendencies drain out more quickly. And so the defilements arise less and less. This is the quenching of the defilements. We quench these anutsaya, and then we quench the asava that's shooting out. And then the defilements and the nivarana, the hindrances, are quenched as well. Whether it's to the level, this just through correct practice, this continues. If we do mindfulness of breathing correctly, this draining off of the tendencies develops further and further, whether to the level of sotapanna or sagatakami or anakami or arahant, whether the stream enterer, the once returner, the non-returner, or the perfected human being. These are levels where the defilements have been drained off more and more and more, where suffering has been quenched more and more. So the quenching of all this dukkha, of any aspect and all aspects of dukkha, this quenching is the meaning of Nibbana or Nibbana. This is the most important thing in Buddhism. We encourage you to remember these Pali words. The meaning of the Pali words is very special, very concise, and you're better off if you can remember the Pali words and learn their complete meaning. Because when we translate them, much of the meaning is lost. It's much easier to understand the Dhamma when we learn these Pali words, because they capture the meaning just right. Because that's what they were created to do. Whereas once we translate them, much of the meaning falls apart. So, for example, the word tukka or dukkha, it's much better to learn this word, to take the time to learn the word and, of course, its meaning, instead of translating it, because the word suffering doesn't capture the full meaning of dukkha, or unsatisfactoriness, dissatisfactoriness. These translations are only partial, and so they're insufficient, and they'll be an obstacle to you understanding these words, the meaning. So learn the Pali word, learn the word dukkha, because it means much more than suffering. We can, for example, there are three basic aspects to dukkha. The first is the tormenting of the mind, the experiencing that tormenting occurring in the mind. That's the first aspect. The second aspect of the word dukkha is the characteristic or quality of tormenting, of torment that exists. This is the second aspect. It's not exactly the same. And then the third is that which leads to, that which brings on torment. Dukkha has these three aspects. So it's best to learn the Pali word and its complete and correct meaning. For example, if we say this rock is suffering, you'll think we're crazy. If I say this rock is suffering, and we speak in this way, nobody will understand. But when we say the rock is dukkha, if you understand what the word dukkha, then you'll know that we mean this rock here has the quality of dukkha within it. And so if we attach, if we cling to this rock as my rock, or I am this rock, or it's my rock, then that is dukkha in meaning, in the sense that it brings on dukkha. So there's dukkha. Something is dukkha, or it has the quality of dukkha, or it brings on dukkha. When we say dukkha, it can have these different meanings. You have to understand them all to be able to understand the language of Dhamma. This complete quenching of dukkha is the meaning of Nibbana. To have a full understanding of Nibbana, we must have the full understanding of dukkha. So it's something is dukkha, it has dukkha, it's an experience of dukkha. It has the characteristic of dukkha and brings on dukkha, leads to dukkha. So it all comes down to that Nibbana is the quenching of the heat of kilesa, and that's enough. So please pay attention to Nibbana. Be interested in it as the thing that cherishes life, that nourishes, sustains, supports, cherishes life. That without Nibbana, life couldn't go on. This is what allows us to live, the quenching of these fires. This is Nibbana. We hope you'll be very interested in it. Pay careful attention to it, because this is where the story ends, with Nibbana. And so the story ends.